What if I told you that working in New York, once the ultimate badge of ambition, has quietly turned into a survival test disguised as a career dream? Picture this. You wake up before sunrise, squeeze onto a packed subway that groans under decades of neglect, and step into a city that demands everything while giving almost nothing back. The skyline still glitters, the branding still sells the fantasy of success, but beneath that glow lies a harsher truth. New York has become a place where ordinary workers pay a price so high it no longer matches the promise. And yet millions are still trying to hold on, convinced that abandoning the city means abandoning the dream itself. The question that opens the story is simple but unsettling. Why does no one really want to work in New York anymore, unless they accept living permanently on the edge? Not the glamorous edge sold by Hollywood, but the exhausting edge shaped by declining infrastructure, suffocating expenses, collapsing public services, and a job market that demands superhuman resilience. For decades, the myth was that if you could make it here, you could make it anywhere, but now the reality feels flipped. Making it here often means breaking yourself in the process. Walk through Manhattan at rush hour and the contrast hits you instantly. Towers of wealth rise above streets littered with signs of decay. Office workers slide past shuttered storefronts, step over construction pits that never seem to end, and navigate sidewalks that feel more like obstacle courses than urban pathways. Even inside the corporate world, the glamour has evaporated. The pressure is relentless, the competition suffocating, and the rewards, once the justification for the chaos now, barely cover the soaring cost of staying afloat. The city that once promised opportunity now feels like an endless negotiation with exhaustion. But the real shock lies in how normalized this struggle has become. Workers talk about burnout as casually as coffee orders. The subway delays are predictable. The feeling of being overstretched is expected. The cost of housing is so extreme that many professionals live hours away, sacrificing sleep to keep their jobs. What used to be a temporary hustle has become a permanent condition. And yet, for many, leaving feels like failure, as if stepping away from New York means stepping away from ambition itself. This psychological trap keeps people grinding through a system that no longer has room for them. If you've ever felt this tension, the contradiction between the dream and the daily exhaustion, you're not alone. And your experience matters here. Share in the comments whether the city has pushed you to your limit, or if you felt the strain of trying to keep up with a place that's sprinting toward collapse. Make sure to like the video and check if you're already subscribed. Because understanding what's happening to New York isn't just interesting, it's essential. What comes next might challenge your idea of what working in this city really means, and it opens a door to a side of New York most people never talk about, even though it's getting harder to ignore. What comes next for anyone trying to work in New York is the part people rarely admit out loud. The invisible price that drains you long before the actual workday begins. Because once you look past the bright lights and the myth of endless opportunity, you start to see how the city quietly taxes every minute, every dollar, and every ounce of energy from the people who keep it functioning. The cost of living isn't just high, it's structurally hostile. Rent alone has reached a point where even 2 full-time incomes can feel insufficient, forcing workers into cramped apartments, long commutes, or temporary living arrangements that stretch their endurance far beyond what a normal job should demand. The financial pressure is relentless. A simple grocery run can feel like a luxury purchase. Transportation once the great equalizer of New York is now a daily gamble where delays, breakdowns, and overcrowding create a constant sense of instability. Even basic services, from healthcare to childcare to utilities, carry a price tag that reflects a city out of sync with its residents' real earnings. People aren't just working to survive. They're working to keep from falling behind the invisible line where one unexpected expense can derail everything. This psychological burden becomes part of the job itself, an unspoken weight that follows workers through every shift, but the deeper impact goes beyond money. There's a silent emotional toll that comes with navigating a city where competition saturates every corner. Jobs that once offered stability now feel precarious. Employers expect availability at all hours. Side hustles have become the norm, not the exception. And beneath these demands lies an unspoken message. If you can't keep up, the city will replace you without hesitation. This constant pressure creates an atmosphere where burnout isn't a risk, it's built into the system. You see it on the faces of commuters staring blankly into the distance, on the hurried steps of service workers juggling multiple jobs, and in the conversations where exhaustion is treated as a shared badge of honor. This invisible price becomes even harsher when you consider how little the city gives back. Infrastructure crumbles while taxes rise. Public spaces feel neglected. The promise of upward mobility has shrunk, replaced by a sense of survivalism, where everyone is fighting to maintain what little stability they have. Yet, despite all of this, the narrative of New York as the land of opportunity persists, making it difficult for workers to fully acknowledge the toll the city is taking on them. Many continue pushing forward because admitting the truth feels like admitting defeat, even when the reality around them is deteriorating. And this is where the contradiction tightens its grip. People stay because they believe the struggle will eventually pay off, even if all the signs around them point to a system stretched thin and a city that's slowly abandoning the workers who once defined its identity. The invisible price keeps rising, and the people paying it are the ones trying hardest to hold the city together, even as the cracks beneath their feet widen a little more each day. And once you understand how the invisible price shapes every part of working in New York, the next layer becomes even more revealing: the city's rhythm itself. For decades, people romanticized the idea that New York never sleeps, imagining it as a sign of energy, ambition, and possibility. But for the people who work here, that sleepless rhythm has transformed into something heavier. It is not about excitement anymore, but about exhaustion woven into the daily routine. You feel it the moment you step outside. The streets move fast, but not with purpose. They move with urgency, as if everyone is trying to outrun a weight pressing down on them. What used to feel electric now feels draining, and the line between ambition and survival grows thinner each year. This shift becomes unavoidable once you consider the infrastructure workers must rely on. The subway, once the lifeline of the city, is now an unpredictable system that forces workers into constant stress. Delays stack on delays, equipment failures become ordinary, and overcrowded platforms turn every commute into a test of patience. Even buses and alternative routes feel unreliable, as if the entire transportation network is aging faster than it can be repaired. Trying to maintain a normal work routine becomes a negotiation. How early you must leave, how many backup plans you need, and whether you can trust the system enough to get you there at all. These uncertainties chip away at energy long before workers even clock in. Inside workplaces, the pressure continues. The culture of speed has intensified to a level where rest is treated almost like weakness. Deadlines accelerate, expectations increase. Bosses assume constant availability as if the city's chaos should somehow drive workers to perform even more. In offices, you see tired faces illuminated by computer screens late into the night, people eating lunch at their desks, and conference rooms filled with professionals trying to function despite the mental fog of burnout. In service jobs, the pace is even harsher, with understaffed teams covering endless shifts, because turnover is so high that stability barely exists anymore. This relentless motion has reshaped the emotional landscape of the workforce. Anxiety, once a background feeling, is now part of the city's soundtrack. People rush not because they are chasing dreams, but because slowing down feels dangerous in a place where everyone is replaceable. You sense it in the way workers speak in short, tired sentences, in the way they brace themselves before entering packed trains, and in the way small inconveniences spark frustration that feels disproportionate, but is actually the result of constant tension. The city demands resilience, but it demands it every day, without pause, without relief. Even outside work hours, the exhaustion lingers. People return home late, drained by commutes that take twice as long as they should. Neighborhoods that once felt vibrant now feel strained by noise, congestion, and rising insecurity. The idea of unwinding becomes unrealistic when basic routines require so much effort. Weekends that should bring rest often turn into time spent recovering from the week rather than enjoying the city itself. It becomes clear that New York isn't just a place where people work. It is a place that consumes time, energy, and emotional capacity at a pace no human can sustain indefinitely. All of this reveals a deeper truth about the modern New York work culture. It no longer operates on passion or opportunity, but on momentum that no one can stop, even when it wears workers down to the bone. The city keeps moving, and workers must move with it, even if the pace is pushing them toward a breaking point that everyone senses, but few are willing to confront directly. As the relentless pace of the city grinds people down, another reality starts to emerge in the corners of New York that once symbolized ambition: the collapse of the traditional workplace itself. For decades, the idea of going into a Manhattan office tower was almost a cultural ritual, a visual confirmation that you were part of the engine that powered the city. But now those same towers stand half empty, their lobbies quieter, their elevators carrying fewer footsteps, and their upper floors illuminated by only a handful of lights late at night. What used to be a symbol of drive has turned into a quiet reminder that the professional infrastructure of the city is cracking from within. The shift began subtly, with hybrid work reducing office crowds and altering the rhythm of business districts. But beneath the surface, the change is far more severe. Entire floors of once busy companies now sit unused. Buildings that were priced at astronomical values just a few years ago are struggling to find tenants. The commercial backbone of New York is no longer the powerhouse it once was, and the ripple effects hit workers first. With fewer people coming into offices, surrounding businesses, cafes, shops, small services have seen their customer base evaporate. For workers who rely on these jobs, the decline is immediate and unforgiving. Walk through Midtown or Wall Street during what should be peak hours, and the atmosphere reveals more than statistics ever could. Streets that once swelled with professionals rushing between meetings now feel strangely hollow. Many storefronts are dark, plastered with for lease signs that hang there month after month. The loss of foot traffic has forced thousands of small businesses to shut down, leaving workers without stability, without customers, and often without any safety net. The city's economic ecosystem depended on density. Now that density is fractured. Even inside the workplaces that remain operational, the uncertainty is palpable. Workers whisper about downsizing, budget cuts, and sudden closures. Entire teams are dissolved with little warning. Industries that were once stable, hospitality, retail, transportation, office support, now function like fragile structures held together by overstretched staff. People work with the quiet fear that their job could disappear overnight, not because of poor performance, but because the city's economic foundation is shifting beneath their feet. This sense of instability becomes part of the workday itself, a psychological weight employees carry alongside their actual tasks. The physical environment reinforces this feeling. Escalators out of service, dim hallways, malfunctioning HVAC systems, elevators that break down repeatedly. These signs of deterioration inside office buildings reveal a deeper truth. The infrastructure costs more to maintain than many companies can handle, especially when occupancy is so low. Some buildings delay repairs to cut expenses. Others simply ignore issues until they become impossible to overlook. Workers notice. They arrive every day to spaces that feel neglected, as if the city's commercial identity is fading in real time. And yet, despite these clear signs of decline, a strange silence surrounds the situation. Many workers push forward, hoping the downturn is temporary, pretending the landscape is not shifting as quickly as it is. But the tension grows each day. The gap between what New York used to be and what it is becoming has widened to the point where it can no longer be dismissed. People are beginning to recognize that the professional world they built their lives around is transforming into something uncertain, unstable, and far more fragile than they ever imagined. If you've ever walked through those empty corridors, past those shuttered storefronts, or felt that quiet unease inside a workplace that no longer feels secure, share your experience in the comments. Your perspective matters, and it helps reveal what's really happening behind the polished facade the city still tries to project. Yet while the professional landscape inside New York weakens, another contradiction grows in plain sight. The city that exhausts its workers is the same city that dazzles millions of tourists each year. This dual identity creates an unsettling divide between the New York that visitors photograph and the New York that residents endure. Bright lights, iconic landmarks, and curated attractions still shape the global imagination, projecting an image of endless excitement. But for the people who actually work here, that glamour feels distant, almost fictional, compared to the daily grind that defines their reality. The tourist sees spectacle. The worker feels strain. It becomes especially clear in the neighborhoods where tourism thrives. Times Square bursts with color, screens flashing nonstop, souvenir shops buzzing, and crowds moving shoulder to shoulder. Visitors describe it as vibrant and electric, unaware that just a few blocks away, service workers rush through clogged sidewalks, short-staffed businesses struggle to operate, And rising costs make it nearly impossible for locals to live anywhere near the places they keep alive. Tourism brings money, but it also creates pressure, congestion, and a sense that the city is catering to outsiders while neglecting the people who form its backbone. This tension becomes even sharper when you look at transportation. Tourists see the subway as an adventure, a cultural experience, a symbol of New York authenticity. Workers see it as a fragile system strained beyond its limits. The same train ride that feels thrilling to a visitor is, for a worker, another unpredictable obstacle in a day already filled with challenges. Delays turn into missed shifts, overcrowding heightens the sense of fatigue, and constant mechanical problems remind everyone just how neglected the system has become. The contrast couldn't be clearer. What tourists find exciting is what residents must survive. Even public spaces reflect this divide. Areas maintained for tourism receive more attention, more funding, and more visible upkeep, while outer neighborhoods where workers actually live face declining cleanliness, aging infrastructure, and rising insecurity. Families who have lived in the city for generations now feel displaced, not because tourists intentionally push them out, but because the city's priorities have shifted toward preserving the illusion of vibrancy rather than addressing the lived realities of its workforce. The imbalance grows wider each year, leaving workers with the sense that they are supporting a machine that does not recognize them. Inside restaurants, hotels, and attractions, the contrast becomes even more personal. Visitors enjoy convenience, service, and entertainment, rarely seeing the exhaustion behind the scenes. Staff members juggle demanding schedules, unpredictable hours, and workloads intensified by chronic understaffing. They smile through fatigue, maintain composure amid chaos, and deliver the experience that makes the city appear seamless from the outside. But when the shift ends, they return to long commutes, rising rents, and neighborhoods affected by the same structural decline the city tries to hide. The distance between perception and reality becomes a burden they carry silently. There is also the psychological weight of watching the city invest in tourism while essential needs go unmet. Workers see luxury hotels being renovated while subway stations crumble. They see marketing campaigns promoting New York as a must-see destination while affordable housing becomes nearly impossible to find. They see attention poured into keeping visitor zones polished while their own communities feel forgotten. It creates a quiet frustration, a sense that the city values its image more than the people who sustain its daily functions. The tourism economy thrives, but the workforce behind it is stretched thin, balancing the demands of a city that celebrates itself while overlooking the cracks beneath its surface. As this divide widens, the question becomes harder to ignore. How long can a city survive when the version sold to the world no longer matches the reality lived by the people who keep it running? And as the divide between the tourist fantasy and the worker reality becomes impossible to ignore, a larger pattern begins to form, one that stretches far beyond individual frustrations. New York is becoming a city where the basic act of living and working has grown so unsustainable that even long-time residents feel themselves slipping away from a place they once believed they would never leave. The pressures that once felt temporary now feel structural, woven into the very shape of the city. What used to be a matter of personal sacrifice has become a systemic squeeze, affecting families, communities, and entire neighborhoods with the same relentless force. It starts with housing, the foundation of any stable life. As rents surge to levels unimaginable a decade ago, workers find themselves pushed farther and farther from their jobs, forced into multi-hour commutes or into neighborhoods where conditions feel increasingly fragile. The dream of living close to work or finding balance within the city limits has faded. People share apartments with strangers, convert living rooms into bedrooms, or move to outer boroughs where public services deteriorate faster each year. This displacement isn't just an inconvenience. It reshapes the rhythm of daily life, adding hours of travel time and draining the energy people need to survive in such a demanding environment. Then comes the strain on families. When parents leave home before sunrise and return, long after dark, the emotional cost becomes impossible to measure. Children spend more time in after-school programs or with caregivers because their parents spend more hours commuting than being at home. Weekends become a time not for rest but for catching up on chores neglected throughout the week because exhaustion makes even small tasks feel overwhelming. This erosion of family stability happens quietly, gradually, until people realize they are spending more time maintaining their lives than actually living them. Services that once supported daily life have weakened as well. Hospitals struggle with overcrowding. Schools face shortages of resources. Streets in residential areas show signs of neglect, cracked sidewalks, inconsistent trash pickup, dim streetlights, subtle indicators that the city's attention is drifting away from the people who rely on these basic systems. Even the availability of affordable groceries, pharmacies, and essential stores varies drastically depending on the neighborhood, creating pockets of scarcity where the cost of living feels even harsher. These gaps widen the sense of instability that has become a quiet undercurrent in the city. Transportation remains a constant source of stress, not merely in commuting but in overall mobility. Workers living in distant neighborhoods navigate unpredictable schedules, late-night service interruptions, and stations suffering from years of delayed maintenance. The city was once praised for its interconnectedness, but now the network feels stretched thin, leaving those who depend on it most at a disadvantage. The further people are pushed from their workplaces, the more vulnerable they become to every disruption, every delay, every unexpected issue that cascades into the rest of their day. As these pressures accumulate, the emotional landscape of the workforce changes. People once drawn to the ambition and excitement of New York feel instead a lingering sense of weariness. Conversations shift from possibility to survival, from dreams to endurance. The city's reputation as a place where hard work pays off begins to feel outdated, replaced by the reality that even those working tirelessly struggle to maintain a foothold. This shift in perception is subtle but powerful, creating a collective sense that the city is losing something essential: its ability to sustain the very people who give it life. Debt, burnout, instability, displacement, and constant strain all contribute to a broader feeling that New York is slowly becoming a place designed for those just passing through rather than those trying to build a life. And as more workers notice this transformation, a deeper question begins to surface in the back of their minds. One that grows louder each day they try to navigate a city that feels increasingly determined to push them toward the edges. As that quiet question begins to take shape for so many workers, another truth becomes harder to ignore. New York has slowly turned into a place where the people who keep the city running feel increasingly invisible. Not invisible in the poetic sense, but in the structural sense, as if their struggles exist behind a pane of glass that policymakers and decision-makers rarely look through. You can feel this invisibility in the way neighborhoods are left to deteriorate, in the way essential jobs are treated as endlessly replaceable, and in the way public discussions about the city's future often focus on investors, tourists, and corporations rather than the workers who carry the weight of its daily functioning. What makes this shift so unsettling is that New York once thrived because of its working class. The heartbeat of the city came from people who showed up every morning, ran the trains, staffed the hospitals, cleaned the streets, prepared the food, repaired the systems, and held everything together while the world looked on with admiration. But over time, these same workers have been pushed into the margins of the conversation. Rising costs, declining services, and policy decisions that prioritize revenue over stability have left many feeling abandoned by the very city they have devoted their lives to. You see this abandonment most clearly in the outer boroughs and working neighborhoods where infrastructure crumbles faster than it can be repaired. Streets crack, buses run sporadically, emergency response times slow, and public spaces show the unmistakable signs of long-term neglect. These are not the areas highlighted in glossy tourism ads or political speeches. These are the places where the workers live, commute, raise families, and fight every day to keep up with a system that seems to forget them until something goes wrong. And when something finally breaks, the blame often falls on the communities themselves rather than on the years of underinvestment that created the problem. Inside the workforce, the sense of abandonment takes on another layer. Employees in essential sectors report feeling overworked, understaffed, and overlooked. Service workers endure unpredictable schedules and unstable wages. Healthcare workers shoulder impossible caseloads. Transit employees deal with equipment failures and public frustration while lacking the support needed to maintain a system that millions depend on. Even in white-collar environments, the uncertainty hangs in the air as budget cuts, relocations, and restructuring plans leave entire teams unsure of what tomorrow will look like. The Message is subtle but consistent. The system expects everything from workers while offering very little in return. The emotional impact of this can be profound. When people feel forgotten, they begin to detach not only from their workplace but from the city itself. Neighborhoods that once felt like home start to feel temporary. The sense of belonging fades. The pride that once defined life in New York weakens under the weight of constant instability. Workers begin to question whether the city sees them at all, or if they have simply become cogs in a machine that now runs on uneven priorities and fading illusions. This growing detachment fuels a quiet exodus of spirit long before people physically leave the city. Friends talk about moving not because they want to, but because staying feels like choosing a battle they can no longer win. Families calculate how long they can afford to remain before the strain becomes unsustainable. Younger workers wonder whether investing their future here makes sense when the city feels increasingly tilted toward those who contribute the least to its daily survival. These stories accumulate silently, forming a mosaic of people who still care about New York but are no longer convinced that New York cares about them. And if any part of this has echoed something you've seen, felt, or lived, share your thoughts in the comments. The experiences of those who keep the city alive deserve to be heard, especially when the system so often overlooks them. And as more workers feel themselves fading into the background of a city they once powered with pride, New York's physical landscape begins revealing another layer of instability that mirrors this emotional erosion. It becomes impossible to ignore the way the city is slowly wearing down at the edges. How the structures and systems that once held everything together now seem stretched beyond their limits. You don't need reports or political debates to see it. A walk through almost any neighborhood tells the story. Sidewalks crack in patterns that look like maps of stress. Streetlights flicker longer before turning on. Trash piles grow faster than collection schedules can handle. The decay is subtle in some places and startling in others, but the trend is unmistakable. Transportation corridors that once represented mobility now embody frustration. Bridges built generations ago creak under the weight of modern traffic. Tunnels show signs of age that repairs cannot fully mask. Subway stations suffer from water leaks, peeling ceilings, malfunctioning displays, and ventilation systems that struggle to keep up with the heat trapped underground. Even newer developments, designed to symbolize progress, show early signs of strain as maintenance cannot keep pace with constant use. These issues don't exist in isolation. They accumulate, layering inconvenience on top of exhaustion, making every commute a reminder of how quickly a city can fall behind when its infrastructure grows faster in age than investment. The effect spills into public safety as well. Streets feel different after sunset, not only because crime statistics fluctuate, but because the environment itself feels less maintained. Patrol presence varies drastically between districts. Emergency response times lengthen in areas where congestion or outdated layouts complicate access. Ordinary routines like walking home, waiting for a bus, or navigating a dim block after work become moments where the decline becomes tangible. Workers sense that the city they depend on to move, work, and return home is no longer built to support them with the reliability it once promised. Housing complexes also show the strain. Older buildings reveal decades of deferred repairs. Elevators that rattle, heating systems that sputter, hallways with peeling paint, and plumbing issues that return no matter how many temporary fixes are applied. Even new luxury constructions, designed to project stability, often mask structural shortcuts driven by profit rather than longevity. The contrast between glossy advertisements and the daily experience of residents reflects a deeper mismatch between appearance and reality, a defining theme of modern New York. This slow unraveling extends beyond physical spaces into the city's emotional atmosphere. Workers feel the pressure not only through what they see, but through what they no longer see. The sense of coherence, the expectation that the city will function, the belief that systems will hold even when the pace is relentless. That confidence used to be part of New York's identity. Now, each infrastructure failure becomes a symbolic reminder that the foundation beneath everything is weakening. It's not one broken escalator or one delayed train that shapes the perception. It's the accumulation of countless small failures that collectively signal a city struggling to maintain itself. And the effect on workers is profound. When the environment feels unstable, people carry a constant alertness, a sense that something could go wrong at any moment. This subtle stress compounds with the exhaustion already built into their routines, amplifying the emotional burden of trying to sustain a career in a city whose systems feel increasingly unpredictable. The strain doesn't announce itself dramatically. It seeps in quietly, shaping the way people move, think, and evaluate their future. As the outer edges of the city fray, the inner resolve of its workforce begins to fray as well, setting the stage for a shift that becomes harder to ignore with each passing day. And as the city's edges continue to erode, both physically and emotionally, a deeper transformation begins to unfold across New York's workforce, one that reshapes the identity of the city in ways that were unthinkable just a decade ago. More and more people are quietly deciding that the cost of staying outweighs the promise that once brought them here. At first, the departures seemed isolated, driven by personal circumstances. But the pattern has grown into something far more structural, a steady, undeniable exodus of workers who no longer see a future in a city that demands everything and gives back so little in return. The reasons behind these departures vary, but they all follow the same underlying logic: survival. Workers who once endured long commutes now calculate that moving to neighboring states offers not just cheaper housing, but a chance to breathe. Professionals who once felt proud to build their careers in Manhattan now question whether the prestige still means anything when burnout becomes a permanent condition. Families who fought to stay close to their roots now look for communities where daily life doesn't feel like an uphill battle. The city's gravitational pull, once irresistible, is weakening under the pressure of its own contradictions. What makes this shift even more significant is the profile of the people leaving. This is not just about low-income residents being priced out, nor is it limited to those seeking suburban comfort. It includes nurses, teachers, office workers, transit employees, hospitality staff, young professionals, mid-career specialists, people who once formed the backbone of New York's economic engine. Many of them built their identities around the idea that New York was the place where ambition met opportunity. Now they are stepping away, not out of failure, but out of clarity. The city no longer supports the very workforce that sustains it. The ripple effects of this migration become visible in subtle but impactful ways. Employers struggle to retain staff. Businesses operate with chronic understaffing. Service quality declines not because workers are unwilling, but because the pool of people able to afford life in the city shrinks each year. Neighborhoods once bustling with activity begin to feel hollow as long-term residents depart and new arrivals stay only temporarily, treating the city as a short-term experience rather than a place to build a stable life. The cultural depth that defined New York for generations thins out as the people who carried it forward seek refuge elsewhere. Economically, the consequences intensify. When workers leave, spending patterns shift. Local stores lose loyal customers, schools face changing enrollment. City agencies grapple with staffing shortages. Even the tax base begins to weaken in ways that stretch budgets and limit the capacity to repair the very infrastructure that contributed to the crisis. The city finds itself in a cycle where decline fuels further decline, creating conditions that push more people toward the exit. But perhaps the most profound change is the emotional one. For many, leaving New York feels like stepping away from a long-held identity. They carry memories of a city that once inspired them, challenged them, shaped them. Yet the version of New York they encounter today feels distant from the one they invested so much in. The sense of belonging fades as the strain becomes the dominant narrative. They leave with mixed feelings: relief, sadness, nostalgia, and a quiet acknowledgement that the city they knew is slipping away. And for those who remain, the emptiness left behind is not just visible in vacant apartments or quieter trains. It's felt in the shift of energy, the absence of familiar faces, the subtle realization that the collective spirit that once powered the city is dispersing. New York continues to move, but the people who once moved with it in unison are gradually stepping out of its rhythm, creating a new reality the city can no longer ignore. And as more New Yorkers make the difficult choice to step away, the city faces the consequence of something far deeper than a temporary workforce shift. What emerges is a moment of reckoning, a point where the myths that once held New York together collide with the reality workers now face each day. The idea that the city rewards persistence, that it lifts those who push through its chaos, begins to feel less like a promise and more like a memory from a different era. The streets may still glow with the same lights. The skyline may still cut the same shape against the sky, but for many, the emotional meaning behind those symbols has changed. The pride that once defined the city has been replaced by an uneasy awareness that the system no longer aligns with the needs of the people who built it. This shift is not just economic or demographic. It is structural. A city cannot thrive when the people who sustain it feel worn to the bone. And New York, for all its resilience, is now confronting a moment where its identity is being rewritten in real time. As workers leave, the routines that kept the city stable begin to loosen. The vibrancy that once came naturally now feels forced. Even the pace of the streets, once a hallmark of the city's energy, carries a strain that wasn't there before. The cracks in the infrastructure only mirror the cracks in the city's relationship with the very people who once trusted it blindly. But within this unraveling lies an uncomfortable clarity. The patterns we've explored, exhaustion, displacement, instability, abandonment, and exodus, are not random. They form a sequence that reveals how fragile New York's foundations have become. And while the city may still project confidence to the outside world, those who live and work here recognize the signs of a system stretched to its limit. The question that quietly lingers is no longer whether individuals can adapt to the city's demands, but whether the city can still sustain the weight of its own identity without the workforce that once defined it. For those who are still here, navigating the tension between the New York they remember and the New York they now experience, the choice becomes deeply personal. Staying means confronting the pressure head-on, finding ways to preserve stability in an environment that offers fewer guarantees each year. Leaving means acknowledging that the promise of opportunity has shifted elsewhere. And for many, simply voicing these thoughts feels like an act of honesty in a city that prides itself on never showing weakness. If you've reached this point in the reflection, it means the story resonated with you in some way. Before you move on, let your voice be part of this moment. Leave a comment using the phrase, "I stayed until the end," so I know you were here with me through this entire journey. And if this conversation helped you see the city from a new angle, consider subscribing to the channel so you can be part of the next one. A like on this video also helps more people understand what so many workers are silently facing every day. There's another video here on the side that deepens this discussion from a different angle. If you feel connected to what we explored, click and continue with me there, keeping this thread alive as we look at the next layer of a city trying to make sense of its own future.